Yeah, it's what happened with Kherson. Basically, when Ukraine was trying to regain Kherson, Kherson was blocked from one side by the Dnipro River, and Ukraine was uh, methodically, slowly bombarding bridges, strategic objects, and attacking the military camps, trying to force Russia to pull out on their own.
So, Alexei, do we have an understanding of how many Ukrainians may have aided and actually collaborated with the Russians, not kind of under force, who may have collaborated with the Russian occupation forces in Crimea?
It's really hard to assess because again, Crimea was occupied and is occupied for 9 years. So obviously, every Ukrainian citizen at some point had to interact with Russian officials. You can't keep living in Crimea and not interact with Russian proxies or Russian army, right? But there's again, it depends on the level of cooperation. It depends if your kids go to a Russian school or if you are now working in the so-called Russian administration in Crimea. And Ukrainian representative in Crimea, Tasheva, she said that there's about 10,000 Ukrainians who collaborated and who are going to be studied by law enforcement. I think this number is lower than the actual number, but we can only assess that after Ukraine returns to the peninsula.
I just wanted to move on to the Bridge blast. Ukraine has taken responsibility for the recent attack on the Kerch Bridge.
It doesn't. It doesn't. There was actually a major scandal today where a fake Telegram channel, which was said to be Kirill Budanov's channel. Kirill Budanov is the head of the military intelligence. This fake channel was quoted first by Russian media outlets and then also by Ukrainian media outlets. And many, including our media outlet, had to come out with a statement saying that it was our mistake, that it's not an official Telegram channel of Kirill Budanov, and the military intelligence also said that this Telegram channel has nothing to do with Ukrainian officials, and that's actually a separate issue here. Is that Ukrainian officials are using Telegram and Telegram channels really often. They are using their personal Telegram channels. They're using Telegram channels that are linked to their ministries or their agencies, and we are getting a bit numb to fact checking which Telegram channel is legit and which is not. And this situation brings up again a question of fact checking in media. And I can say that on our part, we will definitely try to do a better job for this not to happen.
Yeah, well, thank you for correcting me. Yeah, I saw that on quite a U.S. national news organization. But what sort of strategic impact does this have for the Ukrainian military?
Well, it has a strategic impact if the bridge is actually damaged. Unfortunately, well, this is the second attack on the bridge. One happened last year, and this one happened recently. And right now, it looks like those attacks are actually more of a morale boost for Ukraine, showing that Ukraine can reach the Crimean bridge, that Russian troops are not safe anywhere. But I'm not sure that Ukraine can actually destroy the bridge or damage the bridge sufficiently for this bridge to not be used by Russian troops. Obviously, the bridge is strategic because Russia is using this bridge to ship Russian troops from mainland Russia to occupied Crimea and then to the southern front line. So, if Ukraine is able to damage this bridge sufficiently, this will definitely substantially help Ukraine's southern counteroffensive. But I think at this point, with the drones that are allegedly used to attack this bridge, this is more of just showing the Russians that they're not safe.
Can Russia reasonably hold on to Crimea if it keeps receiving this repeated bombardment from Ukraine onto the Kerch Bridge?
I'm really bad at predictions because anything can happen. Nobody, for example, thought that Russia will destroy the Kakhovka Dam. Nobody thought that Russia would actually create new drones with the help of American microchips that are now found in those drones and missiles. So Russia is evolving. Russia is adapting to circumstances. And I think for Ukraine, it would be extremely hard to take Crimea militarily. I think what Ukraine is attempting to do is to cut the land bridge between Crimea and mainland Russia. And that's the best chance that Ukraine has right now in putting pressure on Crimea, but entering Crimea basically on tanks. Unfortunately, in the near future, I definitely don't see it happening.
But I guess that's the plan for you. I guess that a strategy for Ukraine would be to just try and cut off Crimea until there's almost no point in Russia keeping hold of it.
Yeah, it's what happened with Kherson. Basically, when Ukraine was trying to regain Kherson, Kherson was blocked from one side by the Dnipro River, and Ukraine was uh, methodically, slowly bombarding bridges, strategic objects, and attacking the military camps, trying to force Russia to pull out on their own. And with Crimea, if this year Ukraine will be able to approach the Crimea, basically, then obviously it will have the power to kind of not encircle, but corner Russian troops on the peninsula and try to force Russians out themselves.
Is Crimea quite? Is it well defended by Russian troops? So is there a heavy Russian presence there? I'm only asking because when we saw the Wagner mutiny that happened at the end of June, there were some analysts that were saying actually Russia's put so many troops inside of Ukraine during its offensive that they may not have had enough troops to be able to defend their own land when Prigozhin was doing that. And I guess if Crimea is annexed and they consider it to be Russia, then do they have enough troops in there to reasonably be able to defend it if Ukraine comes?
Well, basically, occupied Crimea is one big military base. It's a hub for Russian troops on the southern front line. It's used as a place where Russian troops get medical help, where they launch drones from. So it's one big military base, and I think at this point, the southern front line, meaning Kherson and Zaporizhia oblasts, and Crimea are the best prepared for any possible Ukrainian counteroffensive. We saw using satellite imagery that there's multiple lines of defenses. There's trenches, there's minefields, there's multiple layers of Russian defenses. And as we see, Ukraine is moving in the direction of Crimea really slowly. And that's because, unfortunately for Ukraine, Russia has an actually a really good defense line.
Is it at all unsustainable for Russia to just continue fixing the Kerch Bridge only for Ukraine to continue to damage it?
Again, when we talk about Russia, it's there's no logic put into many things, and for them, again, it's the Crimean Bridge is something that Russians think of as a national pride, national uh, stature. They see building this bridge connecting the occupied land with mainland Russia as uh, something that puts a legit claim on Crimea as their own, right? And even if Ukraine will bombard it every month or every week, they will continue to rebuild it because for them, leaving it damaged will definitely hurt both the Russian posture and also the sense that Russian President Vladimir Putin is controlling the situation.
Lastly, I just wanted to ask about the way that the bridge was damaged, because it was damaged using a naval drone that shot the bridge upwards from the water, I believe. And we're continuing to see these drones, these kind of surface water drones used by the Ukrainians more regularly, aren't we?
Well, first of all, we don't have actual proof what happened because we have only information from the Russian side. But concerning drone attacks, yes, both Russia and Ukraine got really creative. I think in the past 15, 16 months, both sides created drones that are deadly and really dangerous from the other side. If we're talking about Ukrainian inventions, then obviously they're using some drones that um, go below the radars, go really, really low, that can attack targets really precisely. And I think that for Russia right now, we see that they don't know how to react. They don't know how to defend against those drones. Air defense is of no use if we're talking about this kind of weaponry. Unfortunately for Ukraine, since we saw only a few examples of such military gear to be used, we think that Ukraine has really little of those kind of weaponry, and so right now they're used mostly to, again, for attacks that cause a morale boost among Ukrainians, not to actually destroy or damage military targets. For Russia, for example, there is the Lancet drone, which is really deadly. We know that Ukraine lost a lot of even Western provided weapons because of those drones. Again, they're really small and really sufficient, and Russia has increased the production of such weapons, and Ukraine doesn't have the means to shoot all of them down. So, as I was told by Ukraine's head of basically cybersecurity, is that this is a cyber war, but this is also a war where modern new weapons are used. This is a war that nobody ever saw. The amount of drones, the amount of cyber warfare that's happening is insane. And unfortunately for Ukraine right now, I think that Russia is still ahead in this, and Ukraine will require a lot of time and effort to catch up and to build enough weapons like those drones that we're talking about to have and to pose serious threat to Russians on the Crimean Bridge or deep inside their territory.
Would you say, though, that it's quite a modern war? Because, I mean, in some respects it is, with the use of cyber warfare and the worst use of drones. But then again, we are seeing the return of kind of trench warfare like we saw in World War One. In some ways, I feel like it's going back to war of attrition.
Well, yes and no, because again, we don't have a lot of wars to compare with. The last major war that happened in Europe was basically World War II, right? And yes, every war unfortunately involves a war of attrition and trenches. We can use a lot of drones, we can use HIMARSs, new planes, weapons, rockets, missiles, but still, the war is won by people on the front line, by people with guns. And even if we consider this to be the modern war, new, using all the top technology, it's still the ordinary people with guns who will have a decisive say in how this war ends.